The car is an 1897 Daimler, the very first privately owned English-made motor car. The driver is Major General Hugh Parker Montgomery in the uniform of the Royal Green Jackets, and the venue, the city of Winchester, with a one-way system that, like the city itself, is definitely going places. Or is it? Winchester, once the capital of Britain. Ancient Britons, Celts, Romans, Normans, Peters, Jeremies, and now Rorys. They've all lived in or near the city. 9 out of 10 local cats list the town's architecture, and in particular its cathedral, as one of the main attractions. The city where Alfred burnt the cakes, allegedly, is full of religious, legal and military history, and it's also full of people. The 1980s saw a boom in small businesses setting up here seeking a land of milk and honey. But on a typical Friday afternoon, you're more likely to find jam instead. And it all started with the motoring major.
Pay attention, right, here, down here, onto me, oh, not too low, right. Major General Hugh Parker Montgomery lived here, 35 Southgate Street, Consett, as you were, Winchester. And as it says here, the first British purchaser of a motor vehicle. Bit of a flash so-and-so. Also was in the 60th Rifles here at Winchester, first person to have an electrically lit house here in Winchester, and appropriately enough educated at Eton.
Modern-day residents would laugh at that first Daimler's top speed of 15 miles an hour. On a good day in the town centre, you're lucky to reach 10. As you chug round the one-way system, you'll have ample time to muse on a problem that faces all Britain's cities, but is all the more acute in Winchester, with a tradition of historical architecture that stretches from before the Romans to just before the new shopping centre was built. And that problem is, how do you conserve the good old bits while adapting the rest for modern city life?
Well, it takes a lot of planning.
If town planners are guarded by men in white coats, their research is done by volunteers in rather fetching yellow ones, as Alma explains.
Well, this little gadget is an electronic gadget that fits into a computer at the castle.
Right, got massive knobs on it. Can you explain?
Yes. Well, this first knob records all the cars, light vans, heavy goods, buses, motorcycles, bicycles.
Train spotters would give their best anorak to see as many different vehicles as Elsie here can in one day.
68,000 in a day? How do you get to sleep at night? I suppose you can't count sheep, really. You spend all day... So your husband does this as well, doesn't he?
Yes, we work together as a team.
But the other half of the team has dropped off.
So easy. Oh, I know it is, isn't it? So do you like Winchester?
Oh, yes, very much.
You lived here, man and boy?
Well, 90% of the time, yeah.
See, when I grow up, I'm going to sit on that corner and I'm going to count the buses going past.
Well, that wasn't my ambition in those days.
You're the top pedestrian counter, are you?
We change, we alternate between one survey and another. I mean, sometimes you might be doing cars, sometimes pedestrians.
Horses.
Yes.
As we go through the polar bear counting, you see one and think, well, that's my one for the day. So, Alma, can you talk me through the process that ends up with you being thrown out onto the streets?
Well, the Department of Transport and the County Council decide there's some sort of traffic problem. So the County Council throw us onto the streets.
Right.
And we come up with some figures that go back there to the City Council, who report them back to the Department of Transport, who then will arrange for a contractor to build a road.
And so, in fact, what could happen is the contractor will also be consulting, presumably, with the City Council.
Yeah.
And the Department of Transport will be watching what's going on.
Definitely, yes.
And I think if we look at that now, we see that this is, in fact, the original plan for the Winchester one-way system.
That is the original plan.
There it is. That's the original plan. I'm convinced it's a major contribution to road safety. This is Peter Snow handing back to the man on the bicycle.
In fact, one recent improvement has actually increased traffic delays by 23%, which means the easiest way to get around Winchester is by bike. For the lanes and byways at this end of the town provide a sanctuary not just from the traffic, but in some ways from the 20th century. This is the Winchester the tourists come to see, but they have to walk, because while for centuries the city gates were open to all traffic, St Swithin's Gate is now closed, but it still retains its period charm.
And what 14th century arch is complete without 20th century street furniture? No motorbikes, no cars.
But watch out for low-flying bicycles if you're visiting from Mars. As the traffic winds its tortured way through the top end of the town, the historical bit, inhabited by Winchester College and its pupils, the Wickhamists, is virtually traffic-free. You'd be forgiven for thinking the person behind this scheme spends all his time in a pub. And in a sense, you'd be right, because I'm joined now by Graham Jameson, who's the landlord of the Wickham Arms behind us. So tell us a little bit about the problems that you faced.
Well, essentially...
what have you actually got against the car?
Essentially here, we've got 1,000 years of architecture in this street, starting from Kingsgate Arch there, all the way through. And there were 3,000 cars a day finding their way through this 9-foot wide stretch of road here. 3,000 cars a day, that's a million cars a year. And whilst...
An awful lot of counting.
There's a lot of counting. Well, that was the City Council's count.
I see, and you took photographs of the whole process,
From my window upstairs, I took nearly 500 photographs showing all aspects of the hazard.
And this is from your bedroom?
From my bedroom upstairs.
You have 500 photographs in your bedroom. Can I have the negatives?
Certainly can, yeah.
Something I'm used to saying to pub landlords is, what's the damage?
Well, the damage is expensive in this instance. You can see here, just starting from this brickwork here, where the large vans have worn away at the corners.
Well, I thought perhaps, you know, sleeping policemen or these sleeping Wickhamists, perhaps you could persuade some of the younger pupils.
There are plenty of those about.
I know you've still got, there's probably still a fag system. You could persuade some of the younger pupils perhaps to lie on the road for key points of the day.
In those days, of course, we're talking about 3 years ago, you weren't allowed to put sleeping policemen down in any instance.
You had to use real ones.
You had to use real ones.
Well, I think at this point, Graham, we've got a choice. I can either come up to your bedroom and look at your photographs or have a look at the barrier. Which would you prefer?
I think we'll go and look at the barrier, darling.
Right. Ooh, matron. This attractive barrierette across College Street has divided the town. That's the traffic and the people. Well, at the risk of sounding like a sex therapist, how effective have you found the barrier method?
Well, remarkable, of course. I mean, the effect when you stop 1 million cars and heavy vehicles a year coming through these narrow streets and these 9 right-angle bends, the difference is huge to the people and to this 900-year-old environment.
But not everyone shared that, though. You did make yourself quite unpopular over
Oh,
this.
very, because everybody knew who I was, that I had the pub, and they accused me of making myself this wonderful big car park for nothing in the middle of the city.
They've got a point there, haven't they?
They have. I said thank you and bowed politely.
But Graham has a point too. By discouraging traffic, he has created a very pleasant environment, parts of which can be enjoyed by the public, all of which can be enjoyed by the boys of Winchester College. The college's history is reflected in its architecture. High walls with very small windows were built at the time of the Peasants' Revolt to keep out peasants. These days, the £12,000 a year fees have the same effect. Here, they don't just teach history, they're part of it.
This is Middlegate, and we look at the somewhat weather-beaten statuary above it.
This is when, 14th?
14th century. 1397 was Outer Gate, and this would have been, therefore, before that. And we're now in the heart of the college chamber court, and one of the traditions that I was talking to you about is that a ceremony called ad portas takes place here. It's the maximum benefit that the school can bestow upon a Wickhamist.
This is a mega Wickhamist.
I think a mega Wickhamist would describe it very well indeed, yes.
And are they greeted in English?
They are greeted in Latin.
Who was the last one?
Sir Geoffrey Howe, I believe, was the last one.
Did somebody have to translate dead sheep into Latin? What would it be?
Well, I don't believe anybody did, but had they had to do so, I suspect that Bovis Mortis might fit the bill, or Moribundus.
Lord Bovis of Mortis. My splendidly erudite guide, Patrick McClure, as a former pupil himself, might have enjoyed the odd dead sheep in the form of lamb chops, along with his jam, roly-poly and custard, here in the 12th century scholars' dining hall, where 12th century manners are still practiced today. And any unwanted visitors are kept out with the aid of this little bolt. No, not that one, this one.
Agimus tibi gratias omnipotens des, pro his atque iis donis tuis, quae de tua largitate simsum juri, per Jesum Christum Dominum nostrum. Amen.
Well, that's easy for him to say. Victorian dress is mandatory for scholars, as it seems is tomato ketchup. Cromwell was entertained here in 1646. Even then, the college was aware of the possibilities of private and corporate hospitality, a tradition they continue to this day. This dining room is strictly for scholars. They certainly aren't as thick as 2 short planks, but some of the crockery is.
Sorry to interrupt. What is this?
Well, they're called trenchers. And
You have these for breakfast, lunch, and tea?
Breakfast and supper.
And what, you put marmalade on them? And
sort of, if it's cheese or something like that, yes.
Oh, all right.
Originally, of course, they were used all meals, and you made an encirclement of potato or whatever appropriate in order to retain the gravy, and everything was put in the middle.
Was that have a moat or something?
You had exactly. You had
These are presumably these are machine washable, are they?
Yeah, absolutely, machine washable.
Which is more than can be said about some pupils. Uniform is all important. Ketchup is to be worn in the breast pocket. The college's founder, William of Wickham, gazes down impassively as the dons engage in learned discourse. They're used to film crews here, but the pupils didn't like being kept away from learned pursuits, even for 10 minutes.
Why did everyone disappear after lunch? Why did they go off so quickly?
The extra 10 minutes you had for coffee was a bit fake, because we usually go and watch Neighbours, which is why people were getting irritated by that time. There's a deadly hush descended on...
Where'd you go to watch that?
We've got a little TV room, which is up in the old tower.
Just the one?
Yeah, just
It's rather a wonderful room.
So that's 70 people pile in there and watch Neighbours?
Well, not 70, but...
The civilised ones of
15.
us don't pile in there and watch Neighbours.
The college's relations with its neighbours have also been something of a soap opera. This canal runs through the famous water meadow, where pupils can study that special subject that might just clinch a place at Cambridge, rowing. It's a serene picture of English life, but still waters run deep. For on the edge of this meadow is the Winchester bypass. When planners suggested using the land to complete the M3, the local community stuck its oar in. So an alternative route was sought, and the scene was set for a rather less serene picture of English life.
In, out, in, out, in. Wait for it, Carruthers. Out. Well done.
The new route involves carving a huge cutting through Twyford Down, a unique site rich in prehistoric settlements, not all of which appeared on the developer's plans. The environmental and financial cost is many times that of widening the existing bypass or instituting a park and row scheme. It's clear that a wider road was needed to keep the M3 traffic moving away from the city, but where the existing road along the canal side followed the contours of the local landscape, the Twyford Down route goes right over the top. The long-running planning battle involved heated public protests, special branch raids, private detectives, and finally the unceremonious eviction of the last objectors. Like Wells Fargo's mail service, the road must get through. One who spoke against the route was County Planner Merrick Denton Thompson.
Well, Rory, what we're looking at actually is right down the line of the M3 motorway as proposed through Twyford Down. Where we are, in fact, the motorway will cause a cutting of something like 400 feet wide by 100 feet deep. What that goes through, in fact, is, first of all, this is an area designated as an area of outstanding natural beauty. That's a national landscape designation because of its scenic beauty. But it is also a scheduled ancient monument. What we're standing on, in fact, is the Iron Age village site from which Winchester itself emerged.
Do people actually care that much about that, though, by and large? I mean, if as a planner you're faced with the problem of getting the traffic away from Winchester, isn't it better to shove it behind a hill than have it closer to Winchester?
Well, of course people care about the landscape. This is why we have national landscape designations. We actually have protected landscape through Acts of Parliament precisely because the nation values these very precious, very scarce parts of our national heritage.
Do you think, weighing up the relative merits of Winchester College history, which is this place, and the Iron Age and Bronze Age forts up on Twyford Down, do you really think the right decision was made?
As I see it, it's if you actually go up and inspect the site, it will be tucked away as much as you can.
I think the college come out of this very badly indeed. This is land, after all, that was actually donated to the college to protect it from development.
Do you feel the college has rewarded that generosity?
I hope so.
By putting a motorway through it?
I don't think that was the college decision.
Well, the college would have certainly had some say in the matter.
I don't think so.
Now, were the Board of Governors consulted at Winchester about this?
Well, I knew of all the environmental implications, and I went to see Lord Aldington, and I said to him, look, I think the Board of Governors need to know about this. And Lord Aldington said, no, I essentially make the decisions, he disallowed me to present the information to the governing body of Winchester College.
Lord Aldington, a former chairman of the Conservative Party, was then warden of Winchester College, and though he refused our man access in person to the Board of Governors, he did undertake to circulate a letter. Since 1984, the government's favoured route was always Twyford Down.
I understood that certainly some of the old Wickhamists were useful, to put it mildly.
Well, that's certainly news to me.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116
But you could avoid the roads altogether and take the train. Some people love Winchester so much, they travel back to it 5 days a week on the 1832 from London. But it's not just the train that takes the strain, it's the wallet as well, as you find when the ticket collector arrives.
You actually have to stamp your access card. How much do you have to pay a year?
£2,560.
What's good about Winchester? What's the good things about it? About living in that area?
It's fresh air.
It's very commutable.
Yes.
I mean, if I lived in Bournemouth, didn't I do it well? If I lived in Bournemouth, it would be the most appalling commute. That is whiskey. But if I was to live in Winchester and go via the pub on the way home every evening, I would get into trouble most evenings.
Winchester is close enough to be able to enjoy the benefits, money and excitement and so on of working in London, while the benefits of living in the country, effectively.
Well, and does this happen every night on the 18th?
Yes, it does. Mornings going up.
It was better on the old trains, though, because they were bigger and you had more area.
I suppose if you start at one end and end at the other, you could actually do a 20-mile pub crawl without actually having to walk further than 10 feet or something.
Well, actually, it's a 70-mile pub crawl. You're almost right.
I think the appeal of this is that we all wind down and have a chat and a laugh and enjoy ourselves.
So are you always dying to get back to Winchester at the end of the evening? Or what about you, Claire? You think it's got a lot going for it?
I would prefer not to shop in Winchester because the car parking's so awful. I think the traffic's, it's horrendous on a Saturday.
Or indeed any other day, as people take their cars to work. But how many still have work to go to? Like everywhere else, the recession has taken its toll on Winchester's once prosperous high street. Shopkeepers are struggling, although receivers and signwriters are still being gainfully employed. But somewhere around here, it seems there's one firm still making a mint, Bendix of Mayfair, who make chocolates here in Winchester. Funny old world. Strangely, there's no laundrette here. The nearest cinema's 20 miles away, and the shopping centre suffers from the greenhouse effect. That glass-topped model of 80s design is a model of 90s recession. Local architectural consultant Clive Houghton thinks he knows why.
Right, here's the Brooks Centre. Where have they actually gone right? What have they done wrong?
Well,
let's go past.
Let's let the bus pass. And therein you can see the first real problem. This vast expanse of bus lane, one of the fumes. There'll be another bus up behind us in a moment, but this vast bus lane here had to be kept to keep the street free because the buses have to get from down here at the bottom of town to the top of town. But there's another major feature that's a problem, and that is that there are no good links from the High Street, which is the main shopping pitch for the city, through to the Brooks. All we've got is at this top end here, a very narrow link through a dark alley, and from there all you can see is a vista of a busy street. You don't look into the complex at all. There's nothing inviting about it.
The public were invited to choose a design, but this wasn't the favourite. It still isn't.
Well, look, Rory, it's thursday on a Thursday morning, and there's almost nobody in the Brooks Centre. It speaks for itself, doesn't it, really?
Well, there are some people over there.
Yeah, I think they're painted on the boards, Rory. I don't think they're real people.
And sure enough, here we find one of the most bizarre ironies of post-Thatcher society. For an artist's impression of what bright and attractive shops look like, you visit the shopping centre. For the real thing, you have to visit the City Museum, where you find not only real customers, but where they've actually preserved the old high street shops. Lock, stock and specimen jar. Who knows, maybe somewhere here there's a cure to the disease that's blighting the boutiques. To be fair, the owners are doing all they can to shift the shops.
Upper floor, rent and rates going down.
With special events and attractions to entice the crowds.
Rent and rates going further down.
Owners Ladbrokes, the bookmakers, have stacked the odds by putting in some of their own shops.
At first to show its group with kitchens owned and trained by Ladbrokes, followed by the new Ladbrokes side tea room with Pretty Chic owned by Ladbrokes catching up fast, and Focal Point, the last of Ladbrokes runners, bringing up the rear.
There's also this part that's rather forbidding, isn't it? It's sort of like Prison Landing. It's rather like Richard Rogers meets porridge.
Norman Stanley Bremner, you have been found guilty, and I hereby sentence you to 2 weeks in the Brooks Centre.
The retailers are all hoping that economic recovery will at last give them something to celebrate. Meanwhile, back at the cathedral, there's a birthday party going on.
Well, you can almost cut the atmosphere here outside the west window at Winchester Cathedral, where they're waiting to celebrate 900 years of history. One balloon for each year of this cathedral being here. So as you can... 800 years of... 720 years of history celebrated, 1 year, 1 balloon, 1 very wet presenter, and an awful lot of children.
While traffic, recession and local planning battles keep their feet on the ground, the people of Winchester find their spirits lifted by the cathedral and the sense of history that surrounds them. It's this, together with the odd, cosy English pub and the surrounding countryside, that attract visitors and locals alike to Winchester. And down the ages, travellers have found a welcome here at St Cross, a living model of Hiram's Hospital in the novels of Trollope. This ancient sanctuary with its beautiful transition Norman chapel was established by William the Conqueror's grandson Henry de Blore in 1136 to shelter 13 poor feeble men and distribute the wayfarer's dole.
And here we are. Let's see who's in. For 850 years, wayfarers have been able to find comfort here. Until today, apparently. Hello? Ah, hello.
Good morning.
Hello, this is the dole office, is it? May I
You
claim...
could put it that way.
Can I trouble you for a cup of sugar? Or the wayfarer's dole? Can I claim my wayfarer's dole, please?
By all means.
Thank you. Don't know what we're going to get here. A Marmite sandwich and a thermos. Let's get through a lot of thermos. What's the plural of thermos? Oh, no, what's this? Now, this is the wayfarer's
This is
dole.
your beer and your bread.
So it's three pieces of bread and ale, which has been brewed here.
It used to be brewed here on the premises. Nowadays, of course, we don't. Our turnover is not sufficient to make it worthwhile.
Turnover is an ancient monastic phrase there.
The hospital, like so much of old Winchester, is peaceful, historic, and very photogenic.
Excuse me, here are a couple of wayfarers who seem to have come an awfully long way for a piece of bread and a bit of beer. Are you tourists?
No, we live here.
Oh, sticky moment number one, I'm afraid. So what do you do here? Well, you're filming, obviously. What are you filming for?
We're from Shoei College, near the town, really. And
is that a Japanese college?
Yeah. Yes. 2-year language course.
And all aspects of British studies, such as music, cultures, and environment history as well.
Do you have sort of places like this in Japan? Like the St Cross?
No, we don't.
No.
Unusual?
Very unusual. That's why you came to film me.
I better stop interrupting you then.
You did.
Oh, sorry. Well, I know where I'm not wanted.
Where are you going?
Given its history, its architecture, its surroundings, and its pubs, it's surprisingly difficult to find such enthusiasm about the city from the locals. Should we call this Winchester? I asked Councillor Jock MacDonald.
This is a very, very special town, and I think one of the problems is that people think it's so special that it can't always come up to their expectations.
Well, this is the thing, in a sense, we're taking a snapshot of a city at a certain time, and if we were to come back in 2 years' time, or, I mean, you never know, as John Major keeps saying that. We only have to wait a few months, and it'll all change.
I think that we want people to see that this is a town which is very delicate, very beautiful, and that if they really wanted to have their roads through Winchester, you wouldn't have much of Winchester left. I mean, it's a choice between the town, which is a historic town, a very important town, or the motor car. And you can't please everybody.
But if the traffic spells frustration for some, for others, it could mean a job. Who knows, even fulfillment.
4,335. 4,330. I've done it! I've done it! House! I've got the full look! I can give up my job! Brilliant!
Winchester, city of kings. A lovely city, and an old one. Even before the Normans came, it had its place in history. For many centuries after, there was a royal residence here. And in the troubled times of the Wars of the Barons, to seize Winchester was as important as to hold London. Like so many old towns, the streets are narrow and full of character. But they're also full of problems for the heavy traffic of today. The West Gate is the only one of the old city gateways still standing. From here, the High Street runs down the hill. 15th century houses shelter behind the city cross. Here it was that kings were proclaimed, and sermons were preached to crowds gathered in the open space around. King Alfred, who swept the Danes out of southern England, is still commemorated in the principal city of his realm by this statue. Being merely 50 years old, it's a comparative newcomer to Winchester, as is this early 19th century bridge, which replaces a much older structure. By the bridge stands the old city mill. Its days of grinding corn are over, but it still has a service to render the community. Today, it's a youth hostel. And for the pilgrim who's young in spirit, and as pilgrims should be short of money, there's a warm welcome and a good night's rest here. A royal site for a royal city. The Romans were quick to see the advantages of this rich Itchen valley with high, dry ground served by abundant streams. The great cathedral. Yes, it seems to lie sleeping in the heart of the city. It has no spire or tower to be seen from every quarter. Instead, it stands apart in its green surroundings, quiet and dignified at all times. This is the true start of our pilgrimage. The 14th century West Front. Here is the essential spirit of the art and people of England. The present cathedral, which replaced a Saxon building, was started in 1079 and consecrated in 1093. Much of this Norman building still stands, concealed behind later work. Restoration and repair is continuous. Stone crumples, timber rots. Even the original foundations have proved inadequate after centuries of service, and concrete has been pumped into the subsoil to support the structure. This is the deanery, where Philip of Spain stayed when he came to Winchester to marry Mary Tudor in the cathedral, and in this way, as he thought, gain control of England. Charles II stayed here too while his palace was being built near the town. But Prebendary Ken wouldn't have Nell Gwyn in the house, and the king, preferring the company of his mistress to that of his churchman, left abruptly. To a house nearby, Jane Austen came in 1817 on a short visit to Winchester. And here it was that she spent her last days. And from the cathedral precincts, College Street leads towards Winchester College. It was William of Wykeham who rebuilt much of the cathedral and who founded Winchester College and the sister foundation of New College, Oxford. The gateway and other parts of his original buildings are still in use here. Built in the 14th century, they're among the oldest school buildings in England. Carved on one of the walls is an inscription phrased with old world charm and medieval piety, learn, leave, or be licked. Here, on the site of the ancient castle, Judge Jeffreys peened his bloody assize after the collapse of Monmouth's ill-fated rebellion. Dame Lyle, the elderly widow of one of Cromwell's soldiers, was found guilty of harboring 2 fugitives and was sentenced to be burnt alive. But her influential friends were able to have this savage sentence modified to one of mere execution. Just outside Winchester stands the oldest almshouse in England, the Hospital of St. Cross, founded in 1136 for the care of 13 poor men, feeble and so reduced in strength that they can hardly or with difficulty support themselves without aid. Here the traveller can still claim the wayfarer's dole of bread and small beer. The present inmates don't seem to be quite as feeble and reduced in strength as the founder intended, but then nobody would grudge them their declining years in these peaceful surroundings. Now, from this cathedral city of calm dignity, we start along the 150 miles of roadway and field path that lead to Canterbury. The name Pilgrim's Way was an 18th century invention. Pilgrims probably used it sometimes on their way from the shrine of St. Swithin at Winchester to that of St. Thomas at Canterbury. But long before the Pilgrims, the way was there, one of the great prehistoric routes across England. Here is the attractive little church at Martyr Worthy, and through this village many people consider the way runs. But then there's no end to the arguments as to the authentic route. But whichever one you decide upon, the Hampshire villages offer a wealth of picturesque corners, of thatched roofs, moss-grown tiles, warm brick walls, and grey stone churches. Alresford is the first small town we come to. It was a Puritan town during the Civil Wars and was burned by the Royalist troops. In those days, it was often unsafe to walk in the streets. Today, things are quite different. Here in Chawton, at the rectory, Jane Austen lived and wrote the greater part of the 6 novels that have imperishably preserved the manners of her time and her much-loved name. And so the road winds on, where medieval travellers slept hedge and ditch, and if they were true and devout pilgrims, made a cheerful noise with their handbells. And what better spot in the 13th or the 20th century for a wayside meal? But more and more, the materialistic world of metalled roads and unseen traffic are consuming the countryside. These green paths and ancient ways have escaped so far. But there is need for unceasing vigilance by all those who love England, if this beautiful country is not to be submerged in the endless, ugly, untidy litter of subtopia, to become a vast junk heap of bad buildings, road signs, hoardings and pylons. In the good old days, even the great had their difficulties. The Duke of Norfolk, while staying at Farnham Castle, spoke of marrying Mary, Queen of Scots. Queen Elizabeth told him very sharply to be careful on what pillow he laid his head, a remark which one feels had an edge to it. The castle, much restored, is now the residence of the Bishop of Guildford and a retreat for the clergy. But the Shell Keep and much of the old work still remain. Solid, time-worn masonry, scarred by battles of long ago and by the unwearying elements. The Shell Keep is a fine early Norman example. From a high point on the ruins, we can see the way leading on towards Canterbury. Generally, the route lies on the summit or southern slopes of the downs, only occasionally coming down onto the lower lying lands, where the path would be impassable in winter. But it is seldom far from a village where the traveller may break off and spend the night. Occasionally, the old road and the new meet, as at this bridge surmounted by a pilgrim's cross, where the main arterial road pays tribute to the older route passing beneath it. Seal, like its neighbour villages, nestles snugly in this Surrey valley on the southern slope of the Hog's Back, around a little old-world 13th century church. The Pilgrim's Way runs right through the village, through Puttenham to Compton, whose church was mentioned in the Domesday Book, and which contains many relics of the Saxons. Compton also contains a memorial chapel to the Victorian painter G.F. Watts, and a memorial gallery of his work. In the village itself, the modern traveller is attracted by the timeless elements of rural life. From the quiet of Compton to the bustle of Guildford, the county town of Surrey. The 17th century Guild Hall swings its bracket clock over the roadway. Guildford is full of inns, many of them centuries old, and among the finest buildings in the town. The one whose liquor Samuel Pepys recommended has given way to a chemist's shop. Obviously, somewhere, someone still sells the right brew. The Hospital of the Blessed Trinity shows a characteristic red brick facade. All Guildford needs to make it a fine city is a cathedral. And this it will have when the work started in 1936, but suspended during the war, is completed. The chancel and transepts are in use, and work on the nave goes forward. Stones from Canterbury and Winchester are buried beneath the foundations of this 20th century cathedral, which stands midway between them. When the work is completed, Guildford will have its modern cathedral to match its ruined Norman castle. The days of the barons' wars and civil wars are forgotten. Only the calm and mellowed remains look down on the inhabitants of today. passes close by the town, though not through it. It runs down past the ruined chapel of St. Catherine, perched on a low sandstone hill. And across Shalford Meadows, where Shalford Fair was held. This, by the way, may have been the original Vanity Fair of Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. And on to Shalford itself, which crosses the River Wey. On April the 17th, 1955, a pilgrimage greater than any it had seen before moved through Guildford. 20,000 people of high and low degree passed through the narrow streets and out to the cathedral on the hill. In an address, the Bishop of Guildford said, "Our pilgrimage marks a new stage in the building of our cathedral. Much has been done inside in the last 2 years. Now we are coming outside, and we long to see the nave finished in the next year or two." But the pilgrimage is not merely an occasion in the business of building the cathedral. As we go up the hill to God's house, so we direct our wills to the doing of God's will. We shall one day dedicate our cathedral to His service. So on this day, we dedicate ourselves once again to the same cause, to proclaim His kingdom and glory to the world. Just over the hill, set in these beautiful Surrey woodlands, lies the Imperial War Grave Cemetery at Brookwood, where sleep the comrades in arms of the free world. Men of all the services and of all the allies lie here side by side. Newark Priory, once the foundation of the Austin Canons, but now nothing but a picturesque ruin. Nearby, the idle wheel of Newark Mill turns in the River Wey. But not far from this haven of peace, the main Portsmouth Road confronts the traveller. Too many cars, far too many cars. Surrey Constabulary. This stretch of road has its niche in history. A few months back, and even today, cars travelling along here had their windscreens mysteriously shattered. Police and scientists alike were puzzled. They couldn't find an explanation. Might it be the sound barrier? Or the atom bomb? Or could it be... What do you blame him? From here, our way runs through beautiful country to Albury Downs. Albury's silent pool is said to be haunted. King John, and nobody says good of him, is reputed to have surprised the miller's daughter bathing. Legend has it that she let go the branch she was holding and drowned. But I hope the story had a happier ending. From the quiet serenity of Albury, a few miles along the main road, brings us to Shear. As with so many villages along the way, the pride of Shear is the church. The porch was rebuilt in 1636, and the food and drink for the celebration cost 30 shillings, enough in the money of that time to ensure a very festive atmosphere. No, nobody knows why it's called Friday Street, but a young lad can still get some free fishing hereabouts. Winchester Hampshire was once a centre of the iron industry, and if the trade hadn't gone north to the coal, Winchester Hampshire might have been like Sheffield today. Dorking is famous for fowls, large white snails, and water sushi, a form of freshwater fish stew. There's great argument as to which of these old Dorking inns was Dickens' Marquis of Granby, where old Sam Weller told his son of the trials of being married to a sharp-tempered widow. But what does it matter which one it was? They're snug little pubs, all of them. Burford's stepping stones carry us across the River Mole. Will time ever mellow these modern concrete blocks as it did the old stone ones? Castle Mill, also on the Mole, carries us across into Kent, still one of the loveliest counties in England, though London is fast eating into it. But down here, along the line of the Downs, there is still profusion of orchard, sheepfold, and hop garden. A few years back, this was Balmally, the route for Hitler's bombers and V-1s on their way to London. But all the time, the land and the stock had to be tended. The immemorial life of the farm went forward. For 400 years, the Kentish orchards have held their high reputation. Kent when the apple blossom is out, or when the cherries are ripe on the trees. Or if your interests are more specialized, when the hops are being gathered. Hops came in with the Reformation in the early 16th century, and since then the hop gardens of Kent have given distinctive flavor to English beer. They've also given working holidays to London's East Enders, who move out in their thousands every year to go hopping. When they return to the great smoke after their few weeks in the open, they leave the vines torn down and stripped, and the hops drying in the oast houses. From the oast houses to the brewery, and from the brewery to you. Well, we've come a long way. Far enough to give anyone a thirst. In the valley of the Silver Darenth are the ruins of Otford Castle. A nightingale once disturbed St. Thomas's devotion here, and a blacksmith once misshod his horse. Now they say nightingales never sing and blacksmiths never flourish in Otford. But other crafts keep going here, as in most rural areas. Though it's a little sad that there are no young men in the trade. The last village before Canterbury, unspoiled and likely to stay so. It lies on the line of the Pilgrim's Way, but up a steep hill from the main road. Little traffic disturbs its peaceful green. Long may it remain so. Many of the houses round the green are timber framed and show the weathered beauty of their oak beams, cut from the forests of the Weald more than 400 years ago. The oak blackens with age and shows up the bright whiteness of plasterwork, making the typical half-timbered house so characteristic of England's countryside. Within sight of Canterbury, a white cross cut in chalk of the hillside marks the point where our way joins the road taken by the most famous of all pilgrims, the characters of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. From St. Martin's Church on the hill, they too must have looked down many hundreds of years ago through slight morning mist on this inspiring view of Canterbury. As in Winchester, here at Canterbury too, only the West Gate remains. The Falstaff Inn, ready to welcome us, as it has welcomed tens of thousands of others since it first opened its doors in 1403. Every part of Canterbury is brimming with history. The Greyfriars. In 1224, 5 little brethren of St. Francis were lodged in a garden and later built their friary. The House of Agnes, which tradition associates with the love story of David Copperfield and Agnes. Dickens had it in mind when he described Mr. Wickfield's very old house bulging out over the road. The Sun Inn, as it now is, where David found Mr. Micawber waiting for something to turn up. These old houses are still called the Weavers, after the Huguenot and Walloon refugees, who settled here when they were driven out of France and the Netherlands by religious persecution. They brought to England their skill in weaving silk and fine fabrics, and started a new industry in Canterbury. Through the arched gateway of St. Augustine's Abbey, we catch a glimpse of the cathedral towers rising up over the city wall. Butchery Street has an ugly name and an ugly history. It was a favorite lurking place for thugs. Today it's as peaceable as you could ask. The only butchery now is practiced on prime Scotch beef. So, through the narrow old Market Street of Mercery Lane, where the fronts of the houses lean out across the road until they nearly meet, to the end of our pilgrimage. The Cathedral Church of Christ at Canterbury, the place of martyrdom of Archbishop Thomas of Becket. And specially from every shire's end of England, to Canterbury they went. So it was in Chaucer's day. So it is today. So may it ever be.